The morning mist hung heavy over Buckingham Palace as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what would become the most controversial day of his 20-year career. At 42 years old, Morrison had served the crown with unwavering dedication, earning respect from colleagues and superiors alike. His tall frame and stern expression commanded attention, while his impeccable record spoke of a man who took his duties seriously. Morrison had joined the Royal Guard straight from military service, drawn by the honor of protecting Britain's most important family. Over the years, he had witnessed countless ceremonial events, state visits, and private moments that required absolute discretion. His colleagues often joked that Morrison was carved from the same stone as the palace walls, unmoving, reliable, and eternally vigilant. The palace corridors buzzed with unusual activity that Tuesday morning. Queen Camilla had scheduled an unannounced inspection of the guard rotations, something that had become increasingly common since her coronation. Staff members whispered among themselves about her growing influence over palace protocols and her tendency to make sudden changes without consulting traditional advisors. Morrison's partner, Corporal Sarah Williams, approached him near the main entrance. Williams had been working alongside Morrison for 5 years, and their partnership had become legendary among the guard units. She was known for her quick wit and ability to defuse tense situations, while Morrison provided the steady backbone that kept their team functioning smoothly. "Have you heard about the new orders?" Williams asked, keeping her voice low as other guards passed by. Her expression showed concern, and Morrison could see the tension in her shoulders. "The Queen Consort wants to implement some changes to our standard procedures." Morrison raised an eyebrow. Throughout his career, he had seen many attempts to modify established protocols, but most were discussed extensively before implementation. The Royal Guard operated on centuries-old traditions that had been refined through generations of service. Any changes required careful consideration and approval from multiple levels of command. "What kind of changes?" Morrison inquired, though something in Williams's tone suggested he might not like the answer. He had learned to trust her instincts over their years of partnership, and her obvious unease put him on alert. Williams glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "She wants us to prioritize her personal security detail over traditional royal protocol. Apparently, she feels the current arrangements don't adequately reflect her position as Queen Consort." The implications of such changes troubled Morrison deeply. Royal protocol existed for specific reasons, developed through centuries of experience, and refined to ensure both security and proper ceremonial function. Each element served a purpose, from the positioning of guards to the timing of ceremonial movements. Altering these procedures without proper consultation could compromise both security and tradition. As they discussed the situation, Palace Administrator Margaret Thornberry approached with a clipboard and an expression that suggested important business. Thornberry had been managing palace logistics for over 15 years, and her knowledge of proper procedures was encyclopedic. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. "Sergeant Morrison, Corporal Williams," Thornberry began formally. "Her Majesty Queen Camilla has requested to meet with senior guard personnel this morning. She wishes to discuss modifications to current security arrangements." Morrison nodded respectfully. "Of course, ma'am. When and where would Her Majesty prefer to conduct this meeting?" Thornberry checked her notes. "The Blue Drawing Room, in 20 minutes. She specifically requested that you attend, Sergeant Morrison, along with Captain Reynolds and Lieutenant Foster." After Thornberry departed, Morrison and Williams exchanged glances. The Blue Drawing Room was typically reserved for formal meetings with visiting dignitaries or important state business. Using it for discussions about guard procedures suggested that Queen Camilla intended to make significant changes. Morrison spent the next 15 minutes reviewing his understanding of current protocols and considering how best to present any concerns professionally. His respect for the monarchy was absolute, but his responsibility to maintain proper security procedures was equally important. The challenge would be finding a way to address any problematic changes while maintaining appropriate deference. The Blue Drawing Room lived up to its name, decorated in rich blue silk wallpaper with gold accents, and furnished with antique chairs and tables. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across oil paintings of former monarchs, creating an atmosphere of historical weight and importance. Queen Camilla was already seated when Morrison and the other senior guards arrived. At 76 years old, Queen Camilla carried herself with the confidence of someone who had navigated decades of public scrutiny and emerged stronger. Her silver hair was styled impeccably, and she wore a navy blue dress suit that projected authority. However, Morrison noticed something different in her demeanor, a sharpness that suggested she was prepared for resistance to her proposals. Captain Reynolds, the senior guard officer, began the meeting with traditional formalities. A veteran of 30 years' service, Reynolds had earned his position through exceptional dedication and diplomatic skill. His ability to balance respect for authority with protection of established procedures had made him invaluable to palace operations. "Your Majesty," Reynolds began, "we understand you wish to discuss potential modifications to our current security arrangements. We're here to listen to your concerns and provide our professional assessment." Queen Camilla leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on the polished table. "Thank you, Captain Reynolds. I appreciate your willingness to adapt. As Queen Consort, I believe certain adjustments are necessary to ensure my security detail reflects my position appropriately." She outlined her proposals systematically. First, she wanted her personal protection team to take precedence over traditional ceremonial positioning during public events. This would mean repositioning guards in ways that might conflict with established protocols for other royal family members. Second, she requested authority to approve or dismiss individual guards assigned to her detail, rather than accepting assignments made through normal command channels. Morrison listened carefully, analyzing each proposal against his knowledge of security requirements and royal tradition. The suggested changes would create potential conflicts with existing procedures and could complicate coordination with other security teams. More troubling, they seemed designed to elevate Queen Camilla's visible security presence in ways that might not align with established precedents. Lieutenant Foster, a newer addition to the senior staff, asked about the reasoning behind the specific changes. Foster was known for his analytical approach and ability to identify potential problems before they developed. His question was diplomatically phrased but got to the heart of Morrison's concerns. Queen Camilla's response revealed her frustration with what she perceived as insufficient recognition of her status. "I've observed that current arrangements don't adequately demonstrate my position as Queen Consort. The public should understand that I am not merely accompanying the king, but serving as his partner in leading this nation." Morrison understood her perspective but recognized the complications such changes could create. Royal protocol had evolved to balance many competing needs: security, tradition, public perception, and the complex relationships within the royal family. Making changes to accommodate one person's preferences could destabilize the entire system. Captain Reynolds asked for time to review the proposals with his senior staff and provide a detailed response. This was standard procedure for any significant protocol changes, allowing for proper analysis and consultation with relevant authorities. Queen Camilla agreed, but specified that she expected a response within 48 hours. As the meeting concluded, Morrison felt a growing sense of unease. The proposed changes weren't just modifications, they represented a fundamental shift in how royal security would operate. Implementing them could create conflicts with other royal family members' security needs and potentially compromise the careful balance that kept the entire system functioning. Walking back to their posts, Morrison and Williams discussed the situation quietly. Both recognized that they were facing a potential conflict between their duty to follow orders and their responsibility to maintain proper security procedures. The Royal Guard had always operated under clear chains of command, but what happened when those commands conflicted with established best practices? Williams voiced what Morrison was thinking. If we implement these changes and something goes wrong during a public event, who bears the responsibility? We're the ones who will be held accountable for security failures. Morrison nodded grimly. His 20 years of experience had taught him that security protocols existed for good reasons. Each procedure had been developed through careful analysis of potential risks and had often been refined after actual incidents. Abandoning proven methods for untested approaches could have serious consequences. The afternoon brought additional complications. Palace staff began whispering about tensions between Queen Camilla and other royal family members regarding the proposed changes. Apparently, some members were concerned about how modifications to security procedures might affect their own arrangements or the overall function of royal events. Morrison found himself in an increasingly difficult position. His respect for the monarchy was genuine and deep-seated, but his professional judgment told him that some of the proposed changes could create serious problems. The question was how to address these concerns without appearing insubordinate or disrespectful. Evening brought a private conversation with Captain Reynolds, who had requested to meet with Morrison away from other staff. They walked through the palace gardens as twilight settled over London, providing privacy for a frank discussion about the situation. "I've been reviewing the Queen Consort's proposals," Reynolds began carefully. "Some of them present significant challenges from a security perspective. I value your opinion, Morrison. You've been on the ground longer than most, and you understand how these procedures actually work in practice." Morrison chose his words carefully. "Sir, I recognize Her Majesty's desire to have her status properly reflected. However, some of the suggested changes could create conflicts with established security protocols. The positioning changes, in particular, could compromise our ability to coordinate with other protection details during large events." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Those were my concerns as well. The question is how to address this diplomatically while maintaining our professional integrity." They discussed various approaches to presenting their analysis, seeking ways to acknowledge Queen Camilla's concerns while explaining the practical difficulties her proposals would create. The conversation highlighted the delicate balance required when serving the royal family: absolute loyalty combined with professional responsibility to provide honest counsel. As night fell over Buckingham Palace, Morrison reflected on the events of the day. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of crafting a response that respected Queen Camilla's position while protecting the security arrangements that had served the royal family well for generations. The stakes were higher than just following orders. The reputation and effectiveness of the royal guard hung in the balance. The palace settled into its evening rhythm, but Morrison knew that sleep would come slowly. The decisions made in the next few days would define his career and potentially impact the future of royal security procedures. He had sworn an oath to protect and serve the crown, but that oath also included the responsibility to provide honest professional judgment when circumstances demanded it. Standing at his post during the late shift, Morrison watched the city lights twinkle beyond the palace walls. Somewhere out there, millions of people trusted that the Royal Guard would continue to protect their monarchy with the same dedication and competence that had characterized the service for centuries. That trust demanded more than blind obedience. It required the courage to speak truth to power when necessary. The foundation was set for what would become a defining moment in Morrison's career and a test of the principles that guided the Royal Guard's service to the crown. The following morning arrived with an unexpected complication that would test Morrison's resolve in ways he hadn't anticipated. As dawn broke over London, urgent whispers began circulating among the palace staff about a heated discussion that had taken place between Queen Camilla and King Charles the previous evening. The disagreement centered on the proposed security changes, with the king reportedly expressing concerns about the broader implications of modifying established protocols. Morrison learned of this development from palace aide Thomas Hartwell, a discreet man who had served the royal household for over a decade. Hartwell approached Morrison during the early morning guard change, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of stress. The aide's knowledge of palace dynamics was extensive, and his worried expression suggested serious political undercurrents. "The situation has become more complex," Hartwell informed Morrison quietly, glancing around to ensure privacy. "His Majesty the King has requested a separate consultation with senior guard leadership. He wants to understand the full scope of the proposed changes before any decisions are made." This development placed Morrison and his colleagues in an extremely delicate position. Royal marriages had always involved complex dynamics, but rarely did those dynamics directly impact operational security procedures. The prospect of being caught between conflicting directives from the king and Queen Consort represented a nightmare scenario for any guard officer. Captain Reynolds called an emergency meeting with his senior staff 2 hours before the scheduled response to Queen Camilla was due. The meeting took place in the guard's office, a modest room lined with duty rosters, procedural manuals, and photographs of guard units dating back decades. The atmosphere was tense as the reality of their situation became clear. "Gentlemen and ladies," Reynolds began, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years' experience, "we find ourselves navigating unprecedented waters. Our response to Queen Camilla's proposals must now consider additional factors that have emerged." Lieutenant Foster spoke up first. "Sir, what exactly are we authorized to share about our assessment? If His Majesty requests our professional opinion independently, are we obligated to provide the same information we prepared for Queen Camilla?" The question highlighted the core dilemma facing the guard leadership. Their professional analysis had identified significant problems with the proposed changes, but presenting those findings differently to different royal family members could appear duplicitous or disloyal. Morrison found himself thinking about the oath he had taken upon joining the Royal Guard. The pledge was to serve the crown faithfully, but the crown represented an institution rather than any individual person. When conflicts arose between different members of the royal family, where did ultimate loyalty lie? Our duty is to provide honest professional assessment to whoever requests it, Reynolds decided after careful consideration. However, we must be prepared for the possibility that our analysis may not align with what either party wants to hear. The morning progressed with increasing tension as word spread that Queen Camilla was expecting the guard's response within hours. Meanwhile, King Charles had scheduled his own consultation for that afternoon, creating overlapping timelines that threatened to complicate an already difficult situation. Morrison spent time reviewing the detailed analysis he had prepared with Williams and other experienced guards. Their assessment was thorough and based on objective security considerations, but they knew it would likely disappoint Queen Camilla. The proposed changes would indeed create coordination problems, potentially compromise security effectiveness, and conflict with established precedence protocols. Williams approached Morrison as he finalized his notes. "I've been thinking about this situation all night," she admitted. "Whatever we say today is going to have consequences that extend far beyond just following orders. Are we prepared for the possibility that speaking honestly might end our careers?" The question was sobering, but necessary. Morrison had always prided himself on his integrity and professional competence. The idea of compromising either principle to avoid conflict was unthinkable, even if it meant facing serious consequences. His 20 years of service had been built on a foundation of honesty and competence that he wouldn't abandon when it mattered most. If we can't provide honest professional judgment when it's needed most, then we're not doing our jobs, Morrison replied firmly. The royal family deserves our best analysis, even if it's not what they want to hear. The first critical moment came when Queen Camilla's private secretary, Eleanor Ashford, arrived to collect the guard's formal response. Ashford was known for her efficiency and discretion, having managed sensitive royal communications for several years. Her presence indicated that Queen Camilla was taking the guard's assessment seriously. Captain Reynolds presented the response personally, emphasizing the thorough analysis that had been conducted. The document was diplomatic, but clear in outlining the practical difficulties that would result from implementing the proposed changes. It acknowledged Queen Camilla's concerns about proper recognition of her status, while explaining why the suggested modifications could compromise security effectiveness. Ashford accepted the response without comment, but her expression suggested she understood the implications. The guards had essentially rejected Queen Camilla's proposals based on professional grounds, a decision that could be interpreted as either principled leadership or insubordination, depending on one's perspective. The afternoon meeting with King Charles took place in his private study, a room filled with books, artwork, and personal memorabilia that reflected his decades of public service. The king appeared thoughtful but concerned as he received the same professional assessment that had been provided to Queen Camilla. "I appreciate your candid analysis," the king said after reviewing the guard's response. "These are complex issues that require careful consideration of multiple factors. Your professional judgment is valuable in helping me understand all aspects of this situation." Morrison found the king's approach refreshingly straightforward. Rather than seeking validation for predetermined decisions, he appeared genuinely interested in understanding the practical implications of the proposed changes. The conversation focused on specific security concerns and potential alternatives that might address Queen Camilla's underlying concerns without compromising operational effectiveness. The king asked detailed questions about coordination procedures during public events, the rationale behind current positioning protocols, and the potential risks associated with modifying established arrangements. His questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of security requirements and genuine respect for the guard's professional expertise. However, the meeting also revealed the personal dynamics affecting the situation. King Charles acknowledged that the proposed changes had created tension within the royal household, and that finding an acceptable resolution would require diplomatic skill as well as security expertise. "The challenge," the king explained, "is balancing legitimate concerns about proper recognition with the practical requirements of effective security. Your professional assessment helps clarify the technical aspects, but the human dimensions require additional consideration." Morrison understood the complexity of the king's position. Royal marriages had always involved balancing personal relationships with institutional requirements, but modern media attention and changing public expectations added new layers of complexity to these challenges. As the day progressed, rumors began circulating among palace staff about growing tension between the king and Queen Camilla regarding the security issue. Some staff members reported hearing raised voices from the royal quarters, while others whispered about canceled social engagements and tense interactions during public appearances. The situation was complicated further when word reached Morrison that other members of the royal family had begun expressing opinions about the proposed changes. Prince William and Princess Catherine reportedly had concerns about how modifications might affect security coordination during joint appearances, while other working royals worried about the precedent such changes might establish. Morrison found himself reflecting on the broader implications of the conflict. Royal protocol existed not just for tradition's sake, but because it provided a framework for managing complex relationships and competing interests within the royal family. When protocol was challenged or modified without careful consideration, it could destabilize the entire system. The evening brought an unexpected development that would escalate the situation significantly. Queen Camilla, apparently frustrated by the guards' response and the lack of immediate implementation of her proposals, decided to take a more direct approach to assert her authority. Morrison was informed by Palace Administrator Thornberry that Queen Camilla had issued instructions for specific guards to be reassigned away from her detail. The list included several senior guards who had been involved in the professional assessment that questioned her proposals. The message was clear: those who opposed her wishes would face consequences. The attempted reassignments represented a direct challenge to established command structures and raised serious questions about the politicization of guard assignments. Morrison's name was prominent on the list, along with Williams and several other experienced guards who had contributed to the professional analysis. Captain Reynolds immediately called an emergency meeting to address this development. The attempted reassignments went beyond normal administrative adjustments and appeared designed to remove guards whose professional judgment had conflicted with Queen Camilla's preferences. "This is unprecedented," Reynolds told his senior staff. "Guard assignments have always been made based on professional qualifications and operational requirements. Using reassignments to punish guards for providing honest professional assessment threatens the integrity of our entire system." The implications were serious. If guards could be reassigned or dismissed for providing professional opinions that conflicted with royal preferences, it would effectively end meaningful security consultation and reduce the guard service to mere ceremonial functions. Morrison knew that his response to this challenge would define not only his own career, but potentially set a precedent for how the Royal Guard would function in the future. The choice was stark: accept the reassignment, and the implied message that honest professional judgment was unwelcome, or take a stand that could end his 20-year career in royal service. Williams approached Morrison as the evening shift began, her expression showing the same determination that had made their partnership so effective over the years. "Whatever you decide to do, you won't be standing alone," she told him firmly. "The principle at stake here is bigger than any of us individually." Morrison appreciated her support, but understood the personal cost that taking a stand might involve. Williams had her own career to consider, along with the financial responsibilities that came with supporting her family. Asking her to risk her position for principle seemed unfair, even if her willingness to do so demonstrated the strong bonds that existed within the Guard community. The night brought little rest as Morrison wrestled with his decision. His sense of duty to the crown remained unchanged, but his understanding of what that duty required had evolved. Serving the monarchy faithfully meant more than following orders blindly. It included protecting the institution from decisions that could undermine its effectiveness and credibility. The palace settled into an uneasy quiet, but Morrison knew that tomorrow would bring a confrontation that could reshape his career and potentially impact the future of royal security procedures. The foundation had been laid for a conflict that would test the principles underlying the entire royal protection system. Standing watch during the late hours, Morrison found clarity in the simple reality of his situation. He had sworn to serve the crown with integrity and competence. That oath demanded courage when circumstances required it, even if the personal cost was high. The question was no longer whether to take a stand, but how to do so effectively while maintaining the respect and professionalism that had characterized his career. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force fundamental questions about loyalty, duty, and professional integrity in service to the monarchy. The third day began with Morrison making a decision that would reverberate throughout Buckingham Palace and beyond. After a restless night weighing his options, he concluded that accepting the punitive reassignment would compromise not only his own integrity, but also the professional independence that the Royal Guard needed to function effectively. The principle at stake was larger than any individual career. Morrison requested a formal meeting with Captain Reynolds at dawn, before the usual palace routines began. The early morning light filtered through the windows of the guard's office as two men who had dedicated their lives to royal service confronted a situation that neither had imagined when they first took their oaths. "Sir, I need to inform you that I cannot accept the reassignment as ordered," Morrison stated clearly. The basis for the reassignment appears to be retaliation for providing honest professional assessment, which sets a dangerous precedent for guard operations. Reynolds had anticipated this moment, but still felt the weight of its implications. Morrison's refusal to accept the reassignment would force the issue into the open, potentially creating a public confrontation that could embarrass the royal family and damage institutional credibility. "I understand your position, Sergeant Morrison," Reynolds replied after a long pause. "I also believe the reassignment is inappropriate and contrary to proper procedures. However, directly refusing a royal directive has serious consequences that extend beyond your individual situation." Morrison acknowledged the gravity of his decision, but remained firm in his conviction. "Sir, if we allow guard assignments to be based on personal preferences rather than professional qualifications, we compromise our ability to provide effective protection. The royal family deserves better than guards who tell them only what they want to hear." The conversation highlighted the fundamental tension between personal loyalty and institutional integrity that had been building throughout the crisis. Reynolds found himself in the equally difficult position of supporting his subordinate's principled stand while managing the broader implications for Royal Guard relations. News of Morrison's refusal spread quickly through the palace staff network. The unprecedented nature of a senior guard directly challenging royal authority created intense speculation about how the situation would be resolved. Some staff members admired Morrison's courage, while others worried about the potential consequences for everyone involved. Williams learned of Morrison's decision while preparing for the morning shift change. Her immediate reaction was to offer full support, despite understanding the personal risks involved. The partnership that had developed between Morrison and Williams over 5 years had been built on mutual respect and shared commitment to professional excellence. "If Morrison is taking a stand on principle, then he has my complete backing," Williams told Lieutenant Foster when asked about her position. "We all swore the same oath, and sometimes that oath requires difficult choices." Foster found himself in a challenging position as a newer member of the senior guard team. His analytical mind understood the logical foundation for Morrison's position, but his shorter tenure made him more cautious about challenging royal authority. The situation forced him to examine his own understanding of what loyal service truly meant. The morning brought an emergency meeting called by Queen Camilla herself, who had been informed of Morrison's refusal to accept reassignment. The meeting was scheduled for the throne room, a choice of venue that seemed designed to emphasize royal authority and the seriousness of the situation. Palace Administrator Thornberry informed Captain Reynolds that Queen Camilla expected Morrison to attend the meeting personally to explain his actions. The formal tone of the summons suggested that Queen Camilla intended to reassert her authority decisively and publicly. "The Queen Consort wishes to address this matter directly," Thornberry informed Reynolds with obvious discomfort. "She feels that Sergeant Morrison's refusal represents a challenge to royal authority that cannot be tolerated." Reynolds recognized that the meeting would likely determine Morrison's future with the Royal Guard and potentially set important precedents for how similar situations would be handled. The stakes had escalated beyond a simple personnel dispute to a fundamental question about the relationship between royal authority and professional independence. Morrison spent the hour before the meeting reviewing the professional standards and procedures that had guided his career. His decision to take a stand was not based on personal animosity or disrespect for Queen Camilla, but on his understanding of what effective royal protection required. He prepared to explain his position clearly and respectfully, regardless of the consequences. The throne room created an intimidating atmosphere for what was essentially a personnel meeting. The ornate decorations, historical portraits, and formal throne emphasized the weight of royal tradition and authority. Queen Camilla entered wearing a dark blue suit that projected formality and determination, accompanied by her private secretary and a senior palace administrator. Morrison stood at attention as Queen Camilla took her seat, maintaining the respectful bearing that had characterized his 20 years of service. Despite the tension of the situation, he showed no signs of backing down from the position he had taken. "Sergeant Morrison," Queen Camilla began with controlled authority, I understand you have refused to accept reassignment as directed. This represents an unacceptable challenge to royal authority that requires immediate correction. Morrison responded with careful respect but unwavering firmness. Your Majesty, my refusal is based on professional concerns about the precedent such reassignments would establish. Guard assignments should be based on qualifications and operational requirements, not personal preferences or retaliation for providing honest assessment. The directness of Morrison's response clearly surprised Queen Camilla, who had likely expected either immediate capitulation or defensive explanations. Instead, Morrison had framed his refusal in terms of protecting institutional integrity rather than personal defiance. Are you suggesting that my authority over guard assignments is inappropriate? Queen Camilla asked sharply, her voice carrying obvious displeasure at being challenged so directly. Morrison chose his words carefully, seeking to address the substantive issue while maintaining proper respect. Your Majesty, I am suggesting that using reassignments to punish guards for providing professional opinions undermines the effectiveness of royal protection. The royal family deserves guards who can speak honestly about security concerns. The exchange highlighted the fundamental disagreement about how royal authority should be exercised in relation to professional staff. Queen Camilla viewed Morrison's refusal as personal defiance, while Morrison saw it as defending principles essential to effective service. Captain Reynolds, who had been observing the interaction carefully, requested permission to speak. As the senior guard officer, he felt obligated to provide context for Morrison's position and explain the broader implications of the situation. Your Majesty, Reynolds interjected diplomatically. Sergeant Morrison's concerns reflect established procedures for maintaining professional independence in security matters. Throughout our service, guard assignments have been made based on operational requirements rather than personal preferences. Queen Camilla's frustration became more apparent as she realized that Morrison was not acting alone but representing a broader institutional position. The challenge to her authority was not personal defiance, but professional resistance to what the guards viewed as improper interference. I am not interested in historical procedures, Queen Camilla stated firmly. I am Queen Consort, and I expect my directives regarding personal security to be followed without debate or resistance. Morrison recognized that the conversation had reached a critical juncture. Queen Camilla was asserting absolute authority over guard operations, while he was defending the professional independence that effective security required. The conflict could not be resolved through compromise because the underlying principles were incompatible. Your Majesty, Morrison replied respectfully but firmly, my oath is to serve the crown with integrity and competence. That oath requires me to resist directives that would compromise professional effectiveness, even when such resistance involves personal cost. The invoking of his oath appeared to surprise Queen Camilla, who had perhaps not considered that Morrison might view his refusal as fulfilling rather than violating his sworn duty. The concept of loyal opposition was unfamiliar in the context of royal service, where obedience was typically expected without question. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Queen Camilla attempting various approaches to secure Morrison's compliance. She alternately appealed to his loyalty, threatened his career, and questioned his motives, but Morrison maintained his position consistently and respectfully. Finally, Queen Camilla delivered an ultimatum that would force the situation to a conclusion. Sergeant Morrison, you will accept reassignment as directed, or you will be dismissed from royal service effective immediately. Those are your only options. Morrison had anticipated this moment and prepared his response carefully. Your Majesty, if those are the only options, then I must respectfully choose dismissal. I cannot compromise the principles that have guided my service to the crown. The finality of Morrison's response clearly shocked everyone present, including Queen Camilla herself. Few people in her experience had chosen personal sacrifice over compliance with royal wishes, and Morrison's willingness to end his career for principle challenged her assumptions about how power and authority functioned within the palace. Captain Reynolds requested a brief recess to consult with Morrison privately, hoping to find some way to resolve the situation without losing an experienced guard or creating a public confrontation. However, both Morrison and Queen Camilla had taken positions that seemed impossible to reconcile. During the recess, Reynolds made one final attempt to change Morrison's mind. James, I understand your principles, but think about what you're giving up. 20 years of service, your pension, your career. Is this issue worth sacrificing everything? Morrison appreciated his captain's concern but had already counted the cost. Sir, If I don't take a stand here, what happens the next time someone wants to compromise professional standards for personal reasons? Sometimes principle matters more than personal consequences. When the meeting reconvened, Queen Camilla had apparently decided to follow through on her ultimatum. Sergeant Morrison, your refusal to follow lawful orders makes your continued service impossible. You are hereby dismissed from the Royal Guard, effective immediately. Morrison accepted the dismissal with dignity, maintaining his composure despite the personal cost of his decision. I understand, Your Majesty. It has been an honor to serve the crown, and I hope my successor will maintain the professional standards this institution deserves. As Morrison prepared to leave the throne room for the final time as a member of the Royal Guard, an unexpected development changed the trajectory of the entire situation. King Charles entered unannounced, apparently having been informed about the confrontation taking place. I apologize for the interruption, the king said formally, but I believe this matter requires my attention before any final decisions are made. The king's arrival transformed the dynamics completely. Queen Camilla's authority over guard personnel was significant, but the king's position as head of state gave him ultimate responsibility for royal protection arrangements. Morrison found himself hoping that the king's intervention might provide a path forward that preserved both principle and career. The stage was set for a royal confrontation that would determine not only Morrison's fate, but also establish important precedents for how conflicts between professional duty and royal authority would be resolved in the future. The principles of effective governance, institutional integrity, and personal loyalty were all in tension, awaiting resolution through the wisdom of the crown itself. King Charles's unexpected entrance into the throne room created a moment of profound tension as three different perspectives on royal authority and professional duty converged in one space. The king's presence immediately shifted the power dynamics, as his constitutional position as head of state gave him ultimate authority over all aspects of royal household operations, including guard assignments and dismissals. Morrison remained at attention, uncertain whether the king's intervention would help or harm his situation. Throughout his career, he had observed King Charles to be thoughtful and principled, someone who valued honest counsel and professional competence. However, the king also faced the delicate challenge of managing his marriage while upholding institutional integrity. I understand there has been a disagreement about guard procedures and personnel assignments. King Charles began diplomatically. Before any irreversible decisions are made, I would like to understand all perspectives on this matter. Queen Camilla's expression showed surprise and perhaps annoyance at her husband's intervention. She had clearly intended to resolve the situation decisively and privately, without involving the king in what she viewed as a personnel matter within her authority to handle. Charles, this is a simple matter of a guard refusing to follow lawful orders, Queen Camilla explained with controlled patience. Sergeant Morrison has defied my authority regarding his reassignment, and such insubordination cannot be tolerated. The king nodded thoughtfully but turned to Morrison for his perspective. Sergeant Morrison, I would like to hear your understanding of the situation and the reasons for your actions. Morrison appreciated the opportunity to explain his position directly to the ultimate authority. Your Majesty, my refusal to accept reassignment is based on professional concerns about the precedent it would establish. The proposed reassignments appear to be retaliation for providing honest professional assessment of security proposals, which would undermine the Guard's ability to provide effective counsel in the future. King Charles listened carefully, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his understanding of both security requirements and institutional dynamics. His questions focused on the specific professional concerns that had led to the current conflict, rather than the personal aspects of the dispute. Captain Reynolds, the king said, what is your assessment of the security concerns that have been raised regarding the proposed procedural changes? Reynolds found himself in the delicate position of providing honest professional judgment while navigating the complex family dynamics surrounding the issue. His response was measured but clear in outlining the practical problems that had been identified. Your Majesty, our analysis identified several areas where the proposed changes could create coordination difficulties and potentially compromise security effectiveness. These concerns are based on operational experience and established best practices, not personal preferences or resistance to change. The king's questions revealed his sophisticated understanding of royal protection requirements and his respect for professional expertise. Unlike Queen Camilla's approach, which had focused on asserting authority, King Charles seemed genuinely interested in understanding the substantive issues underlying the conflict. "I see," the king said thoughtfully. "So the disagreement is not about the appropriateness of making changes, but about the specific nature of the proposed changes and their potential impact on security effectiveness." Morrison felt encouraged by the king's analytical approach, but remained cautious about assuming support. Royal marriages involved complex dynamics that outsiders could never fully understand, and the king faced pressures and considerations that went far beyond the immediate security issues. Queen Camilla appeared increasingly frustrated by the direction of the conversation. "Charles, the specific details are less important than establishing that royal directives must be followed. If guards can simply refuse assignments they disagree with, how can we maintain any authority over our own security arrangements?" The Queen Consort's concern about precedent was valid, but highlighted a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of professional service. Effective royal protection required guards who could think independently and provide honest counsel, not merely execute orders without consideration of consequences. King Charles seemed to recognize this distinction. "Camilla, I understand your concerns about authority, but effective security also requires professional independence. Our guards must be able to speak honestly about potential problems, even when their assessment conflicts with our preferences." The exchange between the royal couple revealed tensions that extended beyond the immediate personnel issue. Queen Camilla's desire for greater control over her security arrangements reflected broader concerns about her position and influence within the royal household. Morrison observed the interaction with professional interest, recognizing that the outcome would establish important precedents for future conflicts between royal preferences and professional judgment. The principle at stake was whether the royal guard would function as independent professionals or merely as ceremonial figures who followed orders without question. After extensive discussion, King Charles requested a private consultation with Captain Reynolds and Morrison to review the specific security concerns in detail. This approach demonstrated his commitment to understanding the technical aspects of the situation before making decisions that could affect royal protection effectiveness. The private meeting took place in the king's study, creating a more informal atmosphere for frank discussion. King Charles showed particular interest in understanding how the proposed changes would affect coordination during public events and whether alternative approaches might address Queen Camilla's concerns without compromising security. "The challenge," the king explained, "is finding solutions that acknowledge the Queen Consort's legitimate concerns about proper recognition while maintaining the professional effectiveness that keeps our family safe." Morrison appreciated the king's balanced perspective, but recognized the difficulty of reconciling competing priorities. Queen Camilla's proposals were not entirely unreasonable from a ceremonial standpoint, but their implementation would create practical problems that could compromise security effectiveness. During the consultation, King Charles revealed additional context that helped explain the underlying tensions. Apparently, Queen Camilla had been receiving criticism in some media outlets about her security arrangements, with suggestions that they were excessive or inappropriate for her position as Queen Consort rather than Queen Regnant. These external pressures have influenced her concerns about ensuring that security arrangements properly reflect her status, the king explained. However, security effectiveness must remain our primary consideration, regardless of public perceptions. Morrison understood the king's position, but also recognized the personal pressures that Queen Camilla was facing. Media scrutiny of royal family members was intense and often unfair, creating legitimate concerns about public perception that had to be balanced against practical requirements. The consultation lasted for over 2 hours, covering technical aspects of royal protection that few people outside the guard service fully understood. King Charles's questions demonstrated both genuine interest and sophisticated knowledge of security procedures, earned through decades of experience as a protected person. Eventually, King Charles reached a decision that would attempt to address all parties' concerns while maintaining institutional integrity. His solution was characteristically thoughtful, seeking to balance competing interests rather than imposing unilateral resolution. "I propose the following approach," the king announced. "First, Sergeant Morrison's dismissal will be rescinded, and no punitive reassignments will be implemented based on professional opinions provided in good faith. Second, we will establish a working group to review current security procedures and identify modifications that can address the Queen Consort's concerns without compromising operational effectiveness. The proposed solution acknowledged Queen Camilla's legitimate concerns while protecting the principle of professional independence that Morrison had defended. The working group approach would allow for careful analysis of proposed changes and collaborative development of solutions. Morrison felt relief that his career had been preserved, but he also understood that the underlying tensions had not been fully resolved. Queen Camilla had accepted the king's decision, but her expression suggested continuing frustration with what she viewed as insufficient support for her position. The working group will include representatives from guard leadership, palace administration, and the Queen Consort's office, the king continued. Their mandate will be to develop recommendations that balance all relevant considerations and can be implemented without compromising security effectiveness. Captain Reynolds expressed appreciation for the king's balanced approach and committed to participating constructively in the working group process. The collaborative approach offered hope for finding solutions that addressed legitimate concerns from all parties. However, the resolution also highlighted ongoing tensions within the royal household about authority, precedent, and the balance between personal preferences and institutional requirements. Queen Camilla's acquiescence to the king's decision was gracious but somewhat reluctant, suggesting that future conflicts remained possible. As the meeting concluded, Morrison reflected on the events that had brought him close to losing his career. His willingness to take a principled stand had been vindicated, but the experience had also revealed the complex pressures and competing loyalties that characterized royal service. Walking back to his post, Morrison encountered Williams, who had been anxiously awaiting news of the outcome. Her relief at learning of his reprieve was obvious, but she also understood that the situation had created lasting changes in palace dynamics. "How do you think this will affect things going forward?" Williams asked as they resumed their regular duties. Morrison considered the question carefully. "I think it establishes an important principle about professional independence, but it also shows that conflicts between royal preferences and professional judgment require careful navigation. We'll need to be even more thoughtful about how we provide counsel in the future." The afternoon brought additional developments as news of the morning's events spread through the palace staff. Reaction was mixed, with some staff members admiring Morrison's principled stand while others worried about the precedent of challenging royal authority. Palace Administrator Thornberry approached Morrison later in the day to discuss the working group process and timeline for addressing the outstanding issues. Her professional demeanor suggested that she viewed the resolution as successful crisis management rather than complete victory for any party. "The working group will begin meeting next week," Thornberry informed Morrison. "The king has requested that recommendations be developed within 30 days, with implementation to follow shortly thereafter." Morrison appreciated the structured approach to resolving the remaining issues, but recognized that the real test would come in implementing whatever solutions the working group developed. Queen Camilla's participation would be crucial to ensuring that any changes addressed her legitimate concerns about proper recognition. Evening brought a private conversation with Captain Reynolds, who wanted to discuss the broader implications of the day's events for guard operations and royal household dynamics. "Today's outcome was positive," Reynolds observed, "but it also demonstrated that we need better processes for addressing conflicts between royal preferences and professional requirements. We can't expect the king to intervene personally every time such issues arise." Morrison agreed that systematic approaches to managing such conflicts would be beneficial. The crisis had revealed gaps in existing procedures and highlighted the need for clearer protocols governing how professional concerns should be raised and resolved. As the palace settled into its evening routine, Morrison felt a mixture of relief and concern about the future. His immediate career crisis had been resolved, but the underlying tensions that had created the situation remained largely unaddressed. The working group process offered hope for constructive solutions, but success would depend on the willingness of all parties to compromise and prioritize institutional effectiveness over personal preferences. The precedent established by Morrison's successful challenge to inappropriate royal authority could strengthen professional independence within the guard service, but it also created expectations that future conflicts would be handled with equal care and wisdom. The balance between loyal service and professional integrity remained delicate, requiring constant attention and skillful navigation. The foundation had been laid for a new chapter in Royal Guard relations, one that would test whether the lessons learned from the current crisis could prevent similar conflicts in the future while maintaining the effectiveness and dignity that royal protection required. 3 weeks after the confrontation, that nearly ended Morrison's career. The working group established by King Charles had developed a comprehensive set of recommendations that would reshape royal security protocols while addressing Queen Camilla's concerns about proper recognition. The process had been challenging, requiring multiple rounds of negotiation and compromise, but the final proposals represented a thoughtful balance between competing interests. Morrison found himself serving as the senior guard representative on the working group, a role that required diplomatic skills he had never needed during his previous 20 years of service. The meetings brought together perspectives from palace administration, royal protocol experts, and security professionals, creating productive discussions about complex issues that had rarely been examined systematically. Queen Camilla's representative on the working group was Eleanor Ashford, her private secretary, who proved to be both professional and pragmatic in her approach to finding solutions. Ashford understood the Queen Consort's concerns about public perception and ceremonial recognition while also recognizing the practical requirements that effective security demanded. The Queen Consort's primary concern, Ashford explained during one working group session, is ensuring that security arrangements reflect her constitutional position appropriately while maintaining effectiveness. She's not interested in changes that would compromise safety for the sake of ceremonial considerations. This clarification helped Morrison and the other security professionals understand that Queen Camilla's original proposals had been motivated by legitimate concerns rather than arbitrary preferences. The media criticism she had faced about her security arrangements had created pressure to demonstrate that her protection was appropriate for her position. The working group's recommendations addressed these concerns through modifications that enhanced the visible aspects of Queen Camilla's security while maintaining operational effectiveness. Instead of changing fundamental positioning protocols, they proposed adjustments to ceremonial elements that would highlight her status without compromising coordination with other protection details. One key innovation was the creation of clearly defined roles during public events that would showcase the Queen Consort's security detail while maintaining established safety procedures. Guards assigned to her protection would wear distinctive insignia and follow modified ceremonial protocols that emphasized their special responsibility for the Queen Consort's safety. Morrison initially had reservations about changes that seemed primarily cosmetic, but further discussion revealed their practical value. Public understanding of royal protection was limited, and creating visual cues that clarified the Queen Consort's status could actually improve security by reducing confusion about protocols during public events. The working group also recommended enhanced communication procedures between different royal protection details to ensure better coordination during joint appearances. These changes would address some of the operational concerns that had been raised about Queen Camilla's original proposals while improving overall security effectiveness. Captain Reynolds participated actively in the working group discussions, bringing his 30 years of experience to bear on complex questions about balancing tradition with innovation. His diplomatic skills proved valuable in managing tensions between different perspectives and finding creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems. The beauty of this approach, Reynolds observed, is that it enhances both ceremonial recognition and practical effectiveness. Instead of choosing between competing priorities, we found ways to advance both simultaneously. Morrison appreciated the collaborative atmosphere that had developed within the working group, despite the contentious beginning to the process. Queen Camilla's concerns had been taken seriously and addressed substantively, while professional independence had been preserved and strengthened through the establishment of formal consultation procedures. The new protocols included provisions for regular reviews of security arrangements and systematic processes for raising professional concerns about proposed changes. These procedures would help prevent future conflicts by creating structured opportunities for dialogue between royal family members and security professionals. As the working group prepared to present its final recommendations, Morrison reflected on how much he had learned about the complex dynamics that shaped royal household operations. His previous understanding of palace politics had been limited to his immediate security responsibilities, but the crisis had revealed broader patterns of authority, tradition, and change management. The formal presentation of the working group's recommendations took place in the same blue drawing room where the original crisis had begun 3 weeks earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was collaborative rather than confrontational, with all parties focused on constructive solutions rather than defensive positions. King Charles received the recommendations with obvious satisfaction, praising the working group's thorough analysis and thoughtful approach to balancing competing interests. His comments emphasized the importance of maintaining both effective security and proper ceremonial recognition for all members of the royal family. These recommendations demonstrate what can be accomplished when different perspectives are brought together constructively, the king observed. The solutions you've developed address legitimate concerns from all parties while strengthening our overall security effectiveness. Queen Camilla's response to the recommendations was gracious and appreciative. She acknowledged the working group's efforts to understand her concerns and expressed satisfaction with the proposed modifications to ceremonial protocols. Her acceptance of the collaborative approach suggested that the confrontational dynamics of the original crisis had been successfully transformed. I appreciate the thoughtful consideration that has been given to all aspects of this issue, Queen Camilla said formally. The proposed changes will enhance both the effectiveness and appropriateness of royal protection arrangements. Morrison found Queen Camilla's response encouraging, particularly her explicit acknowledgement of the importance of professional expertise in security matters. The crisis had apparently helped her understand the value of collaborative approaches to managing complex institutional issues. The implementation of the new protocols began immediately, with modified ceremonial procedures being tested during smaller events before their introduction at major public appearances. Morrison worked closely with other senior guards to ensure smooth transitions and identify any operational problems that required adjustment. The first major test of the new arrangements came during a state visit from the German chancellor, an event that required coordinated security for multiple high-profile participants. Morrison observed the interactions carefully, noting how the enhanced ceremonial elements highlighted Queen Camilla's status while maintaining effective protective coverage. Williams, who had supported Morrison throughout the crisis, expressed satisfaction with how the new procedures were functioning. It's interesting how changing relatively small ceremonial details can make such a significant difference in public perception without compromising operational effectiveness. Morrison agreed that the working group had succeeded in finding solutions that addressed the underlying concerns that had created the original crisis. The modifications were substantive enough to meet Queen Camilla's needs while preserving the professional independence that effective security required. The broader impact of the crisis and its resolution became apparent over the following weeks as palace staff adapted to the new procedures and protocols. The systematic approach to managing conflicts between royal preferences and professional requirements created a more structured environment for addressing future disagreements before they escalated to crisis levels. Palace Administrator Thornberry noted the positive effects on staff morale and institutional effectiveness. Having clear procedures for raising and resolving professional concerns has reduced anxiety and improved communication throughout the royal household. Morrison's role in the crisis had earned him recognition as someone who could navigate complex situations while maintaining professional integrity. King Charles personally thanked him for his willingness to defend important principles, even at personal cost, and expressed confidence in his continued service to the crown. "Your actions demonstrated the kind of principled leadership that the Royal Guard needs," the king told Morrison privately. "The institution is stronger because you were willing to take a difficult stand when circumstances required it." The recognition was gratifying, but Morrison understood that the real test of the crisis's resolution would come over time as the new procedures were tested by changing circumstances and evolving needs. The collaborative approach that had emerged from the working group process would need to be sustained and refined through ongoing experience. Captain Reynolds announced plans to incorporate the lessons learned from the crisis into guard training programs, ensuring that future officers would understand both their professional obligations and the diplomatic skills needed to navigate complex royal household dynamics effectively. This experience has shown us that effective royal service requires more than just following orders, Reynolds explained to his senior staff. "We need guards who can think independently, communicate effectively, and defend important principles when necessary." Morrison found himself increasingly involved in mentoring younger guards who sought to understand how to balance loyalty with professional independence. His experience had demonstrated that these values were complementary rather than conflicting when properly understood and applied. The crisis had also strengthened relationships within the Guard community, as officers who had supported Morrison's principled stand developed deeper bonds of mutual respect and shared commitment to professional excellence. Williams, in particular, had emerged as a stronger leader through her willingness to stand with her partner during a difficult time. As months passed, the new security protocols became routine parts of royal protection operations, and the crisis that had created them faded into palace history. However, the precedent established by Morrison's successful defense of professional independence continued to influence how guards approached their responsibilities and managed conflicts. Morrison remained committed to his oath of service to the crown, but his understanding of what that oath required had evolved through the crisis. Loyal service included the courage to speak truth to power when circumstances demanded it, even when such honesty involved personal risk. The palace had emerged from the crisis with strengthened procedures, improved communication, and a better understanding of how to balance competing interests within the complex institution of the monarchy. Morrison's willingness to take a principled stand had ultimately benefited everyone involved, demonstrating that integrity and loyalty were not opposing values, but complementary aspects of effective service. Looking back on the experience, Morrison understood that the crisis had been as much about institutional adaptation as personal conflict. The monarchy's ability to evolve and improve while maintaining its essential character depended on having people willing to defend important principles, even when such defense required courage and sacrifice. The Royal Guard continued its centuries-old mission of protecting the crown, but with enhanced understanding of how to fulfill that mission in ways that honored both tradition and the demands of effective modern governance. Morrison's legacy would be measured not just by the immediate crisis he had navigated successfully, but by the lasting improvements to royal protection that had emerged from his willingness to defend professional integrity when it mattered most. The story concluded with Morrison standing watch at Buckingham Palace, secure in his position and confident in his contribution to an institution that had emerged stronger from the challenges it had faced. The crown endured, protected by guards who understood that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to stand against inappropriate demands while maintaining absolute dedication to the principles that made royal service meaningful and effective.